Book Notes can be seen every Sunday on C-SPAN at 8 p.m. Eastern and 8 p.m. Pacific Time. Each Sunday, C-SPAN brings you Book Notes, a 60-minute visit with the authors of current books on public policy, history, politics, and other subjects of interest to our viewers. What was your favorite Book Notes program of 1994? Let us know. We'll record your vote, and we'll air the top 5 vote getters during the last week of December. One Book Notes program each day. To send us your choice, write The Best of Book Notes 94, 400 North Capitol Street, Northwest, Suite 650, Washington, D.C., 20001. Or call us at area code 202-626-7963.
For 15 years, C-SPAN has offered cable television viewers a front row seat to timely public affairs events. C-SPAN is funded entirely by America's cable television companies as a public service.
Here's a brief look this morning at C-SPAN's program schedule. All times listed are Eastern. Next, columnists Christopher Hitchens and Mona Charen join us in the studio to discuss the latest events in the news. At 10:30, live coverage of a news conference with Iowa Congressman Jim Nussle. Congressman Nussle is expected to discuss the House Republican transition. And this evening at 6:30, Senator Thad Cochran of Mississippi joins us for a call-in program to discuss his goals and objectives as chairman of the Republican Conference. That's today's C-SPAN program schedule. Next, a viewer call-in program with columnists Mona Charen and Christopher Hitchens.
Mona Charen, the lead in most of the newspapers here on the East Coast this morning involves the GOP governors. Here's the Washington Post. GOP governors seek shift in power. What's your reaction to this story?
They've achieved a shift in power. There are 30 Republican governors now. They have the majority of the states. They haven't had that in a great many years. They're debating a little bit between the governors and the ruling elite, the new ruling elite in Washington, the Newt Gingrich and others, on school prayer, and they're quibbling a bit, but no, the power shift has been achieved.
Christopher Hitchens, the headline of the Washington Times is GOP governors fear state tab for balanced budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you remember that Clinton referred to his administration as a moderate Republican in the book that Bob Woodward did earlier this year. I've now completely forgotten. The Agenda, yes, I knew it had some fantastically banal title. Anyway, good book. I think you can read the recent elections as a sort of defeat for moderate Republicanism, or at least a crisis for it. I mean, its moderate Republican administration has been obviously given a major rebuke, and the sort of Republican who's been benefiting from the recent turn of events is far from moderate. And the governors are going to have to carry on saying what they were saying yesterday, which is school prayers are perfect irrelevance to anything that matters to us. And don't forget that we have the tab passed on to us when you decide to get tough on budgetary matters. So this is the debate of the present and the future, I think, is exactly going to be about what kind of conservatism is meant by.
Front page of the New York Times. You can come in on just a second. I want to get this other headline in. GOP governors caution Congress on social agenda, split on school prayer. Leaders told federal budget cannot be cut at expense of state governments.
Well, I think that is actually a canard. There's a lot of talk about the fact that if the federal government cuts back, then this is all going to be passed along to the states. But you see, this doesn't take account of the revolution that I believe is possibly underway in this society about how much of a role we're going to give government at every level. If the federal government eliminates the Rural Electrification Administration, and just to be substantive here, because that'd be small, that would be pennies, but to be substantive, began to scale back Medicare and Social Security payments to those, say, who earn more than $100,000 a year, You're not talking about passing things along to the states. You're talking about an absolute reduction in government's role. Now, school prayer, you know, what happened was that the Contract for America on purpose did not include any of the social agenda of the conservatives because it was felt, why create controversy in Republican circles? Why not choose the things we're united upon that everybody can sign? There had to be 300 signatures on the document. But Gingrich is quite aware that there were social conservatives who were dissatisfied, and therefore he's talking about school prayer right out of the box to reassure them that their agenda has not been forgotten. But my own view is that school prayer isn't one of the most important aspects of that agenda.
What do you think of Newt Gingrich?
Smart guy. I once made the mistake of going on crossfire with him without rehearsing, without sort of preparing. Yeah, I thought, it was quite early in the 80s, I thought Newt Gingrich from Georgia sounds like one of those complete Republican right-wing goofballs, waltzed into the studio, waltzed out feeling rather dazed. I mean, he's very smart, he's very ruthless, quite humorous, knows a lot, has a strong sense of history.
Sounds like you.
I think perhaps, well, this is the nicest thing that's been said to me all day so far. But I think there's I wouldn't exactly say it's a mean streak in him. It's a very cynical and crude streak. I mean, for example, I do not believe that he can believe what he says about secularism versus religion. There's a very good piece in the New Yorker that's just going off the stands about what he's been saying about putting the deity back at the center of American life and the creator and so on. Mona Charen seems to be implying just now, as much almost, that he feels he has to say this to reassure some creeps in his own party. Well, he's playing with fire, though, if he wants to politicize the creator on day one of the, what is it, the revolution.
What do you think of Newt Gingrich?
I think a great deal of Newt Gingrich. I've known him for a decade, and I think he is one of the more brilliant political strategists in the 20th century. When he told me all those years ago that he was thinking about a Republican majority, I thought he was out of his mind. And I thought, well, it's a nice pipe dream for him, but it's never going to happen. And of course, he made it happen. Nobody predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall. Newt Gingrich did predict the fall of the ruling Democratic elites in Congress, and the Democrats were in control of Capitol Hill for far longer than the communists were in control of East Germany.
Mona Charen's column, published nationwide, we can read it here in the Washington Times, has a subhead on it, "Liberalism has just suffered a stunning rebuke."
Well, I revert to my point about moderate republicanism, which is, I think, what the Clinton agenda has always been. It is true that liberalism has gone down along with it, yes. And I wish that Clinton had never been the candidate of the Democratic Party for president, as you may remember from our discussions in '92. I wish, if they had to have him as candidate, that he'd been beaten in '92, and we'd had all of this then, that the Republicans had taken over everything they said they needed for their revolution, and we could have skipped these miserable past 2 years and the miserable 2 years that lie before us.
On the front page, again, of the New York Times, the bureau chief here in Washington for this paper, R.W. Apple Jr., political memo, Clinton's grip on 96 ticket not so sure.
Right. Well, that's bound to be written. The man has just been delivered by the voters a quite clear, and even in the words of Bill Bennett, surgical message. You know, every single Republican incumbent was reelected, and scores and scores of Democrats were defeated. You know, naturally, he is in a very, very difficult position. I do not see how Bill Clinton rebounds from this. Does he run as a new Democrat again, as he did in 1992, and say, well, but this time I really mean it? The voters are quite skeptical about the man's honesty and integrity as it is. Does he run to the left? Well, if he does that, he's clearly running against the grain of the country. And though he might be able to secure his party's nomination one more time, it is a clear loser. So I don't see what he can possibly do for the next 2 years other than pay a great deal of, ironically enough, pay a great deal of attention to foreign policy, which he scored President Bush for, and enjoy Camp David.
In this, let me just show you these photos. In the jump in the Times, they have some pictures implying that these people might run. You have Al Gore here, Sam Nunn, Jesse Jackson, and Bob Kerrey.
Well, I wish they'd put Jerry Brown back in, and I don't know what he wants to do. He's running his chat show at the moment. People keep saying there's no alternative voice to Rush Limbaugh on the air. Actually, that's not true. Jerry Brown has a very good show called We the People.
Can you hear it here in Washington?
Well, no, I don't see why not either. I mean, I think it's disgraceful that it isn't networked more widely. And Brown understood a long time ago, I think, that there was a libertarian streak in the American people that wasn't necessarily a conservative one, which is the very test, I think, that we're going to be undergoing now, and was for things like a flat tax and, in general, for simplifying the role of government and the relationship of people to it, and combining these with certain insights that you could call radical or left-wing. And that's, I think, the synthesis that's been necessary for a long time. What makes you laugh is, just to comment briefly on what Mona was saying, if I can call you Mona, Clinton, when he was seeking the nomination, his supporters kept on coming up with the supposedly brilliant and unanswerable argument that he was, after all, if nothing else, electable. There was never anything you could do with this argument because it wasn't really an argument. That's obviously dissolved like the dew now. On the surgical point of the election results, I'd just like to say this. It is true that the message was pretty unambiguous in that no Republican incumbent was defeated, but it's also true that none of the, what I would call the Republican chock full of nuts wing was elected. I mean, not even to get rid of Chuck Robb, who by any definition is Mr. Fat, useless, nepotistic incumbent, would people vote for Oliver North.
Fat, useless, nepotistic incumbent. Would you like to explain that?
Chuck Robb. It explains itself. Not even to get rid of Teddy Kennedy, and I'll skip the adjectives this time, would they vote for Mr. Romney, and not even to get rid of La Feinstein would they vote for Huffington. I think there's a surgical message in that too. There is a vote, a libertarian vote, I would describe it as, that's going to the Republicans, but it is not a mandate for the authoritarian Republicans, who in fact do want the government in your bedroom and in your face all the time, and want to have a white Christian, xenophobic, insular America.
Well, I'm glad to see that Christopher, unlike some people on the left, does at least take account of facts, because the election results were unambiguous. But I will now take issue with a couple of his descriptions. The reason that the voters, and I will say in all honesty that I predicted the outcome of the Virginia Senate race incorrectly, and I've eaten humble pie in my column about it. But my analysis of it now, which is so much easier in hindsight, goes as follows. In every race in the country where the issue was big government versus smaller, and the intrusiveness of the liberal welfare state and so on, conservative candidates won out over liberal candidates, and more conservative Republicans replaced moderate Republicans. So that was a clear message. What happened in Virginia was that the race became not about those issues, but the race became about Oliver North. It became a referendum on the man's character, and that was a test that he could not survive.
The New Yorker has a piece that all the newspapers are pulling out a little bit out of context of the article by Peter Boyer. The New Yorker, let me just show the audience what it looks like for this week, and it's on the front page. They advertise the Peter Boyer piece, Can Al Gore's Destiny Survive Clinton's Woes? And then I'll pull this back and you can see this little piece inside the New York Times, which says, Gore as student wrote on Army. And what this is that Mr. Boyer went to Tennessee and visited with Al Gore Sr., the 86-year-old father. Al Gore Sr. said that there is a wall in the house that's empty and that's left for pictures of Al Gore when he becomes president. And then he gave Mr. Boyer letters that Al Gore wrote him back when he was at Harvard in school. And I want to show you what everybody's writing about because, for instance, let me just show you another Washington Post version this morning. Let's see if we can get this on our camera. They pulled it out here, a picture of Vice President Gore. And we put it on Chiron so we could read it. And here's what it says. Here's the letters from Al Gore Jr. to Al Gore Sr. when he was at Harvard in the 60s. We do have an inveterate antipathy for communism, or paranoia, as I like to put it. My own belief is that this form of psychological ailment, in this case the national madness, leads the victim to actually create the thing. went too fast.
Which we call the Vietnam War.
Which is called the Vietnam War. It strikes me that this is precisely what the U.S. has been doing, and then finally creating, and if not creating, energetically supporting fascist totalitarian regimes in the name of fighting totalitarianism. There may be one more on this. Greece, South Vietnam, a good deal of Latin America. And then, is there a final one? For me, the best example of all this is the U.S. Army, and that's his letter in the 60s. What's your reaction to Al Gore's comments?
I wish he'd been saying it in public. I never knew that he was so sound.
Yeah,
before.
I figured you'd agree with that kind
sure,
of
well,
garbage.
it's all true. The United States did impose a military dictatorship on Greece, which is a terrific disgrace. You don't deny it, do you?
Please. Listen, the U.S. saved Greece
nobody
from a terrible fate.
Nobody who knows anything about the events of
Otherwise, it would have been
1960s.
Greek boat people.
Nobody who knows anything about the events of 1967 in Greece doubts that the United States imposed a military dictatorship on the country then.
Yeah, and what was Stalin trying to impose?
In 1967, Stalin had been dead for a long time.
Yes,
no, in 1967, this is ridiculous. In 1967, there was about to be an election in Greece, which would have been won by the Centre Union.
Well, this is very old history. Look, we're awfully lucky that, first of all, I mean, you know, the Gore family seems to be awfully modest, aren't they? I mean, leaving that wall prepared for when their son is president. Look, you don't need to go back that far to know that Al Gore is kind of a nut. I mean, all you have to do is read his book. Earth in the Balance, which is the most ill-informed, unscientific rant I've ever seen, in which he describes the internal combustion engine as the greatest threat to humankind today. You know, greater than disease, poverty, ignorance.
I should say that when Mr. Boyer presented Mr. Gore with these letters, his response was, "Oh, good Lord, oh, God, is that a private letter? Did he share that with you? Good Lord." And then when he went on to say is, well, obviously that's a college kid's silly language in the midst of a very intense period for the country. Mr. Gore said, I went into the Army right after that, and I found out better. Being in the Army was one of the most important growth experiences I've ever had, and it certainly allowed me to shed that nonsense.
Oh, I've got to
let me finish.
That's more like the Al Gore we know, yeah.
I would think that would have sounded grating to me even then. I'm surprised to hear that language.
No, everybody, see, first of all, everybody used to talk that way in the late 60s and 70s. That was just standard dialogue in the American polity, that the United States was the kind of talk you hear from Christopher Hitchens even today. You know, that we were an evil nation, that we were sowing discord and dictatorship around the world for terrible ends. So the fact that he said it is hardly surprising at all. But there's one other point. You know, this is old business, but it really has irritated me for years. So I want to just dispose of it. Dan Quayle was you know, subjected to the terrors of the damned because of his lack of service in Vietnam and because he joined the National Guard. Al Gore was universally described as somebody who had served in Vietnam when he was named vice president. Now, his service, talk about family influence, his service amounted to his father, the senator, making some phone calls to be sure that Al Gore Jr. was assigned to the journalism corps in the Army. He never fired a shot and never was fired at. He was never anywhere near any danger. He was a journalist for, I don't know, 18 months or something.
You have a column in Nation called, why do you call it the Minority Report, by the way?
Oh, we tried everything. I was just determined that nothing with the word capital in it would
Why?
Because that's all been done, I think. Capital punishment, capital letter, capital this, capital that.
Capital gains.
And nothing with Beltway either.
You say here, why? Yes,
and then I've always been an admirer of H.L. Mencken, and so I had the nerve to appropriate a column that he briefly wrote under that title.
In this column, you asked the question, why does the right hate William Jefferson Clinton?
Yes.
What's your answer?
Or to be more exact, why does the right hate him so much? After all, he's never done anything to upset them. On most issues, he's in agreement with them, and moving faster towards making that agreement plain as we speak. So it's a bit of a mystery to me that they should dislike him so much. I think they did dislike him as much as they did because they feared him. For a while, I think they thought that he was potentially capable of creating a centre-right majority around himself and his party by stealing Republican clothes. Now, that effort has just been, to my satisfaction, calamitously defeated. I think the other thing that they hate about him is that when he goes around saying the things that they believe, like school prayer, strong military, family values, all that guff, that they suspect him of not really believing it, of being a hypocrite, and a slob and an adulterer. And so that's the one bit they may have got right, in that I think the thing that's been exposed to view for all to see is that he's a man without conviction and without principle. That's to be disliked by everybody, I should hope.
Talking about the press, in your column, you say that the mainstream press has been the ally of the Democratic Party for at least a generation. The country may be turning to the right, but the liberal redoubts remain. You want to tell us more about this column?
If I can remember.
When did you write this column?
I wrote that column last Thursday.
You say they are the universities, Hollywood, including the music industry, the foundations, the mainline churches, and the media. And if there's one quality that characterizes most liberals, it is this: they are sore losers. It hasn't yet begun, but in time, after the liberals shake themselves from post-election stupor or torpor, the backlash will begin. If they are true to form, they will attempt to defame the election results.
Yeah, that's now I remember. Yes, the thesis of this column was that if you look at the people that the left has been unable to defeat, you will find that, for example, Ronald Reagan, Clarence Thomas, two examples, you will find that after they lose, they go about a systematic defamation of the person who beat them. And, you know, I cite in the column the fact that Robert Bork is now regarded as an elder statesman, as, you know, a great judicial light, and is invited by Good Morning America and all of these other things as, to comment on public affairs, treated with great respect and dignity, which indeed he deserves. But Clarence Thomas, who they were unable to defeat and who sits on the Supreme Court, which must gall them, they are continuing their campaign of vilification and defamation.
Front cover of the New Republic. By the way, what is the New Republic today? The nation is, what would you call it, liberal?
The nation holds up the left end of the rope and has done ever since 1865.
And what would you call the New Republic?
Wavering, centrist, unprincipled cheat.
Mickey Kaus has a cover story, and it says, "They blew it. The fundamental strategic mistake of the Clinton presidency is now clear. If President Clinton had pushed for welfare reform rather than health care reform in 1994, we would now be talking about a great Democratic realignment rather than a great Republican realignment." Would you agree?
Well, I think it's certainly true that Clinton would have to live, and his wife would have to live 3 lifetimes to live down what they did with the health care issue. And their achievement, in other words, in boring and sickening people with a subject that was so important.
Thereby raising health care costs.
And yes, getting everything wrong, getting into it, the worst of the insurance companies' policy and the worst of bureaucratic statism. Socialism for the rich and free enterprise for the poor, if you like. Absolutely monstrous, and never to be forgiven or forgotten, I hope. They couldn't have done worse if they'd tried welfare reform, but I'm very, very, very glad that they did not on that track record.
I have a fax here that is addressed to you, Mona Charen, and it says, "I was appalled by Al Hunt's behavior on Capitol Gang, attacking your comments about the new book, attempting to discredit Justice Thomas. I waited for an apology this past week, however, none was coming. Does Al Hunt really believe you can only write about a subject if you are a reporter? I'm glad you made it today. I always take the morning off when I know you're going to be on. I also like Christopher Hitchens, LDH of Stanton, Virginia." What's this person talking about?
This easily pleased person.
What's the Al Hunt story?
There was an episode a week or so ago on the Capitol Gang where things became extremely unpleasant between Al Hunt and me. From my point of view, it only went in one direction, but that's really all that I care to say about it.
What about the car? Last time, you know, if I'd have told the audience what was on my screen, they would have been frightened to death and said, "You totaled your car." What happened last time? On
my way into C-SPAN, it was very foggy that morning, and you know that in Washington, D.C., if there's the slightest impediment, you know, 3 raindrops will slow down traffic immensely, and fog, forget it. So I was quite late, and had an accident, alas, 10 minutes away from your studios and was disabled by the side of the road, sitting there watching the clock tick by and knowing that that my poor companion was here all by himself, and that you didn't know where I was, and
Eric
it was terrible.
Was here by himself.
It was terrible.
He must have thought all his birthdays had come at once. Eric loves the undiluted gaze of the spotlight, and deserves it, I should add.
The federal page of the Washington Post on this Monday has, you can see it there on the screen, a whole half page devoted to pensions for defeated and retiring members of Congress. And the one, if I can find it on here, that is going to benefit the most in dollars is Phil Sharp of Indiana, who has spent 26 years in the federal service, and he is going to make, if he lives to, I think, his expected 85 years, something like $3.7 million in pensions. And this lists, I guess Tom Foley is getting the most per year, something like $123,000 a year. What do you think?
The thought of still having to pay for Foley is a bit much. That's fascinating. What sort of contributions are they making to this?
Well, I don't know, but I heard it's 20%,
to be able to pull it out at that rate.
This was all over the news last week after the election that, well, don't feel too sorry for those defeated members of Congress because they're going home with X amount of dollars in pensions paid for by you and me. This is exactly the kind of corruption that the voters are sick to death of. They have the sense, and it is partly correct, that the Democratic elites, and the Republicans have partaken in this too, they are not without sin, have talked about doing good for the poor, and in the meantime have feathered their own nests very nicely, thank you. Milton Friedman last night on Book Notes, Brian, talked about the lust for power and motivating socialists, and I think there is too little attention paid to that.
This is an Associated Press story in the Post this morning, and it says pension figures are not readily available on Capitol Hill. And this was put together. It's not the exact figure because the figures aren't available, but this was put together by the National Taxpayers Union, an independent group outside. Do you have any idea why the figures aren't available readily on Capitol Hill?
No, I couldn't think why. I mean, for all I know, they've been making handsome contributions of their own money, and this is all the result of their own thrift. I mean, we may be being unfair. It isn't as bad as it was, if you remember, in '92 when they managed in the closing hours of one business day to pass a clause saying that anyone who retired, didn't contest their seat in '92, could keep all their unspent campaign contributions for personal use. That I think, that really was the sort of thing that made people feel populist and hard done by.
Sorry to interrupt.
By the way, to call this socialism, as Ms. Charen just did, is a little much, I think.
Well,
I speak as a powerless socialist myself.
You're not powerless. The way Washington works, and this is a wonderful illustration of it, is that when Rostenkowski declined to resign in 1992, when there were about a dozen stories written that year saying, isn't Rostenkowski a wonderful public servant? Here he could have retired with $1 million in campaign funds, and instead he's chosen to go on serving his people, you know, selflessly. That gives you an idea of the moral judgments that this Capitol makes about people.
Well, there's, you know, some more figures here. George Mitchell, 24 years. And I guess that includes everything, his federal judgeships, the time he was on Senator Muskie's staff. But it's $2.8 million. Donald Regal, $3.6 million. He's been 28 years in public service. Malcolm Mullet, 20 years. It's $2 million.
But you should just say one more time so people don't get confused. That's assuming they live out a number of years. That's not what they're getting yearly.
Well, the yearly figure for Don Regal is, I believe, I think it's 91,000. It's 59,000 for Malcolm Mullet.
We also support offices for all former speakers of the House with staffs, and for former presidents, of course, and so there's a...
Well, let me take the other side for a moment. These folks would say to you, they put in a lot of years, and they contributed to the pension fund, and so therefore they ought to be able, and they did an important job for this country, they ought to be allowed to live with some...
No, but it sounds to me like rather... Let's submit that might be true, which is what I was trying to say a moment ago. It might be we should view it in the same way as we do their health care arrangements, that this is the way everyone should live. And if Congress can enact this kind of deal for itself, why can't it? Why can't it get around to making that the standard for the voters, too.
Their pensions are according to the National Taxpayers Union, I think I saw it there, something like 3 to 4 times as generous as comparable pensions would be in private industry.
Bob Gilroy of Kentucky, last night's C-SPAN Book Notes program with Milton Friedman, libertarian, clearly describing Bill Clinton as a socialist. Boris Yeltsin made the same observation about Clinton. Is Bill Clinton a socialist? If so, what does that mean for Clinton's future dealings with the Gingrich-led Congress and the American public?
Well, Boris Yeltsin is a hopeless drunk and reactionary, and his opinions on this are of no importance. Milton Friedman, however, is a very intelligent person who I would have thought really would know better. If Bill Clinton was a socialist, I promise you I would know, because there aren't that many of us, and we're generally sort of in touch. And there isn't anyone in America. There isn't anyone in America to the left of who shall we say? Well, me, for example, who has ever had anything but contempt for Bill Clinton, who ran from the start as a neoconservative. I mean, you can just check it out, and if it matters to you, you can't prove it by us. Everyone on the left was against the Clinton candidacy from the beginning because he ran from the right. He thought the only thing wrong with the Democratic Party, viewing its entire performance in the post-war period, was that it was too left-wing. A very strange criticism, I think, to make of it then or now.
Could I make one quick point?
Yeah.
The conservatives dislike Clinton for the same reason. I mean, they believe that he ran as a New Democrat as a tactic because he saw clearly that no left-wing Democrat was going to get elected. And so he positioned himself that way, but that it was a pose and it wasn't sincere. And his instincts are toward more and more government, which is what Milton Friedman was talking about.
Ruth Marcus was here a couple of weeks ago, and she's also from Livingston, New Jersey.
She's a friend of mine.
Did you go to school together?
We have been friends since the 4th grade.
Mona Charen writes a syndicated column for Creators Syndicate, graduate of Barnard College in New York. Is that pronounced right?
Yep.
Always afraid I do that wrong. Lee. Law degree from George Washington University. And Christopher Hitchens, graduate in philosophy, politics, and economics from Oxford in 1970, is originally from Portsmouth, Hampshire, England. We go to the phones. Rockford, Tennessee, you're our first caller. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mona. I love you, and the English gentleman, you're fantastic, too, even if you are so far to the left.
Can you hear this?
Yes. Can you not hear anything?
I can't.
Turn up your little volume.
You just got a compliment.
Oh, I see.
Plugged in? Yeah. She said nice things about you.
Would you mind? I can never get. You wouldn't mind saying all of that again?
No, I can't repeat it.
Sorry.
What about the
Mona will tell you
gist?
after the show.
I found my volume control.
Yeah, she just said she liked you. That's all. Go ahead, caller.
Take it kindly.
You have an excellent panel this morning. I just wanted to tell you why I personally, 55-year-old, Caucasian, female, retired, voted Republican, straight Republican ticket this time. And I really don't think the journalists are getting it. And what really scares me is I don't know if the Republicans get it. The Democrats, I don't think, got it at all, except they're hurting. Okay, I am conservative. I live conservative as the majority of Americans do. I have a budget that I cannot go over that budget. I have to make ends meet. I want an education for my children. I want a home. I want a decent job, not wealthy, just a decent job that can put food on the table. I would love to see prayer back in school, but it may come, it may not come. I think we have a lot of problems, social problems with this country.
Caller, let me interrupt to ask you, though. You say you don't think the Republicans might not even get it. What do you mean they don't get it?
Well, what makes me afraid is that the Republicans are going to be so high on getting in office and that we want less government, which we do. But I think the most important thing is, what frightens me is, all right, I have a son right now who has just gone to get drug tested for a job. He has 2 years in the Army. He just got out recently. He doesn't have a college education, really does not want to go to college. He is going to go into a factory job, which our factory jobs seem like they're disappearing. He will start at $8 an hour, which is an excellent wage in this area. There is no way that anyone making $5 to $8 an hour can hardly make it out on their own if you take in consideration the payments for a house, car, or an apartment, whatever. And I hope the Republicans realize that we put them up there to look out for the small people.
All right, I'm going to let you go at that point and ask both of you to respond. Christopher Hitchens?
$8 an hour, and you have to get drug tested for the right to earn it. That seems to me extraordinary. It gives me the opportunity to say something about the compact and all that, or is it the contract?
Contract with America.
Contract on America, whatever it is. That I don't think anyone can count themselves as serious about crime unless they're prepared to reconsider the war on drugs. And I think that one of the big tests failed by Clinton was that he wouldn't listen to the suggestion of his own Surgeon General that at least this be discussed openly now. Because the certain disappointment that faces the Republican contract, I think, is that nothing they do or promise, the tyrannical 3 strikes, the murderous capital punishment, is going to bring down the crime rate. People are going to get very angry, want to know why that is, and it's because of the war on drugs, and it's high time we had an argument about decriminalization.
Do you think this woman's concern that the Republicans don't get it is accurate?
That remains to be seen. Look, the Republicans are beginning to overcome their image as the white boys country club party, but that is not a transformation that's complete yet. On the other hand, the issue that this woman raises is quite complicated. I mean, she is talking about the transformation of the economy. She is talking about the fact that we are moving away from an industrial economy with very high-paying factory jobs toward an information economy where what is going to be rewarded with high salaries are jobs that require college degrees.
That's Newsweek on your screen, and this is Charlottesville, Virginia. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
If both of your guests insist that Newt Gingrich is brilliant, perhaps he is, but down here in Charlottesville, we don't think too much of his view of history. We think in particular that he's greatly got it wrong with 2 Virginians. One of those is Thomas Jefferson. Any attempt to make him as part of the Christian coalition is just simply wrong. Jefferson was a deist. Nowadays we'd call him an agnostic. He certainly would be being hammered by all those Christian far-righters if he were on the scene today. The other one that he's got it all wrong on is Woodrow Wilson. He's gone around and preached that Woodrow Wilson caused World War II by his 14 points and his stance on what the peace should be like after World War I. Both of those are simply completely wrong, and perhaps they explain why he teaches history in some diploma mill down south.
Reaction?
Well, I did say that I thought Gingrich was all wet when it came to the religious question, and probably cynically all wet at that, so I didn't mean to overpraise him by any means. But he's not a dinosaur like Helms or Thurmond or the sort of people who are so far the beneficiaries of his victory.
San Jose, California, you're next.
Good morning.
Hi.
My question is directed to Ms. Charen there. If, given that the national turnout of the voters was only about 37%, granted a majority, the vast majority of that was Republican turnout, this doesn't truly represent, in my opinion, the attitude of the nation. The nation wants more of a fundamental and useful change in the nation, and it doesn't necessarily mean that we require a far-right change.
Well, I want to just show the audience that this is Dave Carey's, I'm not sure that's the way you pronounce it, Temple University, published in this morning's Philadelphia Inquirer, making the same point this caller is making. With only 20% of the vote, the Republicans have no mandate.
Right. I've heard this many times since the election. There are a couple of points that need to be made. First of all, in all of the surveys that have ever been done about non-voters, I remember one in particular in 1992, what they discover is that non-voters feel pretty much the same way about issues as voters, and that if the non-voters had voted, the election returns would not have been different. I have no reason to think that that was different in 1994. Second, when you're looking at the people who do vote, they are going to be the same motivated, almost the same. I mean, arguably, liberal Democratic constituencies were not energized this time around, felt no reason to bring themselves to the polls. But in general, the people who are concerned enough about the direction of the country to get to the polls in 1994 are still going to be concerned in 1996, and that is a mandate.
Facts from Larry Sharp, Sanford, North Carolina. Why would GOPAC not want to make known its contributors? Do they have a secret agenda?
I know very little about GOPAC.
I know nothing whatever about GOPAC.
Allentown, Pennsylvania, you're next.
Hi.
Hi.
Wow, I can't believe I got through. I didn't hear you guys talk anything about GATT this morning. I was just wondering, I hear both sides, and I'm confused, but I think we haven't really had enough time with NAFTA to know really how it really affected things. You hear it from both sides. It was good or bad. I don't know. I just want to hear some comments on that.
All right, thanks. Where are you on GATT?
Well, free trade agreements are things that's, in a sense, impossible to oppose. You can only evaluate them, see whether they really work, are really free, and are really trade or not. What strikes me about the GATT agreement is, yet again, the division in the Republican ranks over it. I mean, the senior Republican on the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate now, Senator Helms, appears to be strongly opposed to GATT and prepared to hold up business to obstruct it. This does not again seem to be part of the Newt Gingrich free trade
Where are you on GATT?
agenda.
I'm for it. The division, though, I understand the division. In fact, my good friend Alan Keyes and I had a debate about this just the other day on the radio. There are some conservatives who are wary of international organizations, rightly so. Keyes points out that it took us forever to withdraw from the disgustingly corrupt UNESCO, for example, because there was so much squealing on the part of the liberals in the country about how terrible it would be to withdraw from it. And he says the same sort of dynamic will happen here. You know, the fact that we may have the right to withdraw doesn't mean that it will be an easy thing to do for us, and therefore we shouldn't commit ourselves. I disagree. I think the GATT has already been in existence since World War II, worked very effectively. The names have been changed a little, the rules have been changed slightly, but the basic dynamics of the operating of the free trade agreement internationally will not change, and it is in our interest to see free trade expanded around the world.
Headline, Democratic staffers on the way out get a taste of the real world, finding a job. Phil Kuntz in this morning's Wall Street Journal.
Haven't read it yet.
There's some talk about, been some quotes in there about folks shouldn't expect to have a full-time, lifetime job when they come here. What do you think of the idea of having people on Capitol Hill be at the mercy of the electorate, the staffers?
I don't see how it can possibly do any harm.
Mona Charen?
Yeah, it's a positive good, as John C. Calhoun used to say.
New London, Connecticut.
Good morning.
Morning.
Christopher, we've got to get a proper definition in terms here. Bill Clinton is a socialist. You are Khmer Rouge.
What do you mean by that?
I'll tell you, I respect Christopher, though, because he's one of the few liberals I've seen who can intelligently articulate his position.
Is there more?
Yeah.
I was hoping.
There is no more.
That was it.
That was it.
Well, let's just go to Bend, Oregon, then. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Was that all there was?
Oh, well, there's a bit of a delay here. I was watching you on TV. Anyway, Mr. Lamb, I don't think that you're a crypto-fascist, as that gentleman after the woman from Baton Rouge who called you last week said. But at any rate, this is to Mr. Hitchens mainly, in that, well, right before the 1992 elections, Mother Jones magazine, that guppy yuppie paper in San Francisco, they ran an article saying how progressives should possibly vote for the Republicans in that they might support third world causes and more specifically Arabic or Islamic causes more than the Democratic Party would. Now, I've seen a certain amount of that since President, I can see your discomfiture there, but I've seen, and I feel the same discomfiture. To tell you the truth, I don't feel very comfortable that the Republicans are the ones who are now being the people who are parading themselves as the folks who are going to support human rights. However, I'm seeing that possibly with the situation in Bosnia, with the situation in Haiti and such, in many ways, the Republican Party might be doing just a little bit better of a job. And I really hate to say this.
Obviously.
Yeah, I can feel your pain. Well, I don't remember that particular piece in Mother Jones, which is a very good magazine, by the way, and does a very good job of trying to cover the radical waterfront. But it does remind me that, and this is also directed at anyone out there who still thinks Bill Clinton is a socialist, that in the '92 election on 2 foreign policy issues, he ran against Bush from the right. One of these was Cuba, where he supported the Torricelli Amendment, which stiffens the embargo and bans trade with countries that trade with Cuba, something that's really impossibly arrogant. An amendment that the Bush administration had opposed. And the second was on Israel, where Clinton and Gore supported the Shamir government in Israel, and the Bush policy was to support the program of the Israeli Labour Party, the one that has led to, with a lot of toil and sweat still to come, the outlines, at any rate, of a mutual recognition agreement between Israel and the Palestinians. Don't let's forget that. On Bosnia, I think the split is even between and within the parties on whether or not to do anything about Bosnia. I should just like to say, by the way, that the fact that the Serbian forces used napalm and cluster bombs against a United Nations protection zone in Bihać in Bosnia seems to have completely escaped the attention of everyone in the newspapers. But that's what they did over the weekend.
Mona Charen, facts from George and Albuquerque. Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the House would be a hate crime.
Mark him down as undecided.
What about this one? Here's Jonathan Alder, the headline on his Newsweek column this week, Spiro Agnew with brains.
Sorry, who's this about?
Mr. Gingrich.
Oh.
Why the liberal media he loathes is no match for Newt Gingrich.
Oh, they're plenty match for him. You know, as I said earlier, the viciousness has not yet begun, but just wait. There is going to be story after story about Newt Gingrich's personal life, about it. Look, he has become, in the weeks since the election, he has become the leader of the country. Bill Clinton is seen as a bit of a sideshow, and Newt Gingrich is being treated as the president-elect, almost, the leader-elect. And he is somebody that the liberal media have despised for a long time, some with grudging respect, but he represents a movement with which they have no sympathy. They called him a bomb thrower. They called him lots of names. It's going to get worse, in my judgment.
Let me say this about that, as someone used to say, if there is going to be a scrutiny of Mr. Gingrich's private life, which I understand there is going to be, and indeed about his pork barreling in Cobb County, Georgia, he'll be in a very weak position to complain about it, because one thing one does have to say about Bill Clinton, if not for him, over the last 2 years, is that he's had to put up with a great deal of Republican attention on what might be called the character and private life issue. And if there are going to be any complaints about that from Mr. Gingrich, they will sound very odd indeed.
Let me ask you quickly before I go this call. This cartoon was in the Atlanta Constitution, and you can see it right there on the screen. Those are his 2 daughters, and that's him supposedly with his first wife. Mm-hmm. And after that, he said the Atlanta Constitution reporters couldn't come to his news conferences. Was that a smart tactic?
On the part of Gingrich, or on part of the Atlanta Constitution?
Either one.
I think that was a quite vicious and, according to Gingrich, quite inaccurate cartoon. This refers to. Supposedly refers to a real incident in his life where his first wife was dying of cancer and had just had a mastectomy or some sort of an operation and was lying in a hospital bed, and when he went to visit her, he presented her with papers to sign for the divorce. That is the story. He denies that. He denies that and says that's not what happened. He says it came up. The discussion, the divorce came up,
as these things do. You know. You can't really pick your time, can you? I mean, look. Never mind whether it's accurate or not, if Mr. Gingrich has got such a thin skin that he can't stand reporters saying, or even cartoonists doing that kind of thing, then he's a hypocrite, for one thing, because he's expected Clinton to sit still and take all this, and would certainly have made a huge row if Clinton had said that no one from such a paper
he has
could
not
come to the White
attacked
House.
Clinton on his personal life. Gingrich has attacked Clinton on policy.
He hasn't attacked the people who have attacked him. He hasn't exactly disowned them. I mean, there's been... Does he disown Rush Limbaugh? I don't think so.
Fax, nobody signs this, but I thought you would enjoy seeing it. Large type, this fax says, so you can get it, Hitchens. Go plague England, not us.
Ooh.
Well...
Are you an American citizen now?
No.
You've gotten these before. I mean, did they hurt?
No, not in the least.
Glenmont, New York. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Hi. I'm so shocked I got through. I'm going to be nervous here now.
Don't be nervous.
I noticed, or I was in the kitchen, and I'm not sure if I missed anything, but when you showed all the people who got all those big retirement monies.
Yes, ma'am.
Was Bob Michael in there?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Oh. And let me just ask, if the tables were reversed and the Republicans were voted out, wouldn't they get big retirements also?
Well,
surely Malcolm Wallop was in there today. He was rather a hefty one, as you may have heard.
Well, if you look at this list right here, you can see it on your screen. You've got Bob Michael, who's a Republican. You've got Hamilton Fish, who's a Republican. You go all the way down here. Ooh, well, let's see down here.
You have to search.
Tom Ridge, who's a Republican, who just
Republican
ran in Pennsylvania. And you got Don Sundquist.
What I'm saying is, had the Republicans been voted out,
look, the Republicans
they still get a good sizable retirement.
It's like,
of course, like it's a partisan thing.
Ma'am, it is a partisan thing. Let me explain why. The Republicans, of course, get the same kinds of pensions at the same rates as Democrats do, because it really would have been unthinkable for the Democrats to pass laws saying, you know, every Democrat shall get, you know, $50,000 a year pension and every Republican will get 30. I mean, they couldn't possibly do that. So the Republicans did go along for the ride and did enjoy the same kind of pensions. But now that the Republicans are in charge and making the rules, we will see whether they are true to their convictions. If they are, you will see a vote on term limits. You will see votes on devolving power away from Washington, D.C. and back to the people. And the Republicans can now be tested on whether they are sincere about all these issues.
Pittsburgh, you're next.
Thanks. Wonderful to have Christopher on. I was wondering what they thought of the Clinton administration's total rejection of the RAND Corporation study that it commissioned, which recommended that $3 billion in drug funds be switched from law enforcement to drug treatment, basically stating that it was 7 times more cost-effective than drug enforcement in reducing use and 15 times more cost-effective in reducing social costs of crime and lost productivity. And to Mona, if she thinks the Democrats are vindictive when they lose, what does that make the Republicans for the last 2 years?
There's another one, by the way, another faxer, just so you can have it in doses. Liberals, sore losers, you guys have never gotten over Bill Clinton being elected.
Actually, we're grateful that Bill Clinton was elected. I am.
Well, both things could be true,
I'm grateful. I'm grateful because 4 more years of George Bush might have spelled the complete doom of the Republican Party. As it is, the Republican Party has been reborn as a Reaganite party, and the Bushies have disappeared pretty much. Even George Bush's own sons are not Bushies; they are Reaganites, particularly Jeb Bush. But look, on the subject of drug enforcement versus treatment, these things are full of so much pseudoscience and nonsense. He cites a RAND study that proves, you know, that it's 15 times more likely to do X than Y. You can't prove anything like that. That's a mere guess on the part of the people, the social scientists, who are doing this so-called research. The reason you can't prove it is that human behavior is too complicated to be measured, especially in an area like drug taking. Much too complicated to be measured so neatly. My own family experience here is that my brother's a psychiatrist who treats people who want to kick a drug habit, and he says he has also treated people who've been referred to him by courts for treatment. And what he says is that you absolutely cannot do a thing with somebody who's been sent to you unwillingly for treatment. People have to choose to change their behavior. They can be helped, but it begins with the individual volition.
Yeah, the question was that why had the Clintonoids ignored the report, and I believe they would have ignored it even if the findings had been more scientific or more fully rounded than you say, simply because I think that they're scared to consider the alternative of abandoning prohibition, which is the only way that the crime rate is going to be brought down. And they simply won't discuss it because they're politically cowardly.
John M., North Hollywood, California, fax. If this Republican Congress had any guts, they would introduce legislation to means test congressional pensions.
I think we did that, didn't we?
Yes.
We did pensions.
Thank you. Scottsdale, Arizona. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning.
Hi.
I'm thinking that President Clinton will be reelected in '96, and here's why. I think all the negatives that have been hurled at him are in response to a few very big, very visible, yet meaningless miscalculations, mistakes that he's made. And I think this thing that the Republicans have over him will evaporate, much as President Bush's approval rating after the Gulf War evaporated, when people look back and said, well, maybe this wasn't such a great thing, and maybe we went in and just played a bully. And so that's why I think it's going to work. It's all going to, there will be a backlash of sorts when President Clinton gets reelected by a sizable margin.
Mona Charen.
Anything is possible.
Gainesville, Florida, you're next.
Yes. Mona, as much as I might like to think that you're right about the Republicans and the people who did not vote having the same opinions, I would like to mention a little-known fact, or something that doesn't seem to have been mentioned much in the national news, and that's the fact that here in the state of Florida, we had a voter turnout of between 60 and 70% in almost every county, especially here on the northern end of the state. Our county had 64%. Surrounding counties had 70% of the voter turnout. And notice we reelected Lawton Childs, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And so consequently, I do hope that we don't become too terribly complacent, because I can't help but feel that maybe in the next 2 years the liberals may not be so disgusted and will go back to the polls. My other point this morning is the fact that as far as the economy's health is concerned, and I'm certainly not an economist, however, it strikes me that when the Fed reduced the interest rate severely and banks realized they were making substantially less money, they were throwing credit cards at people right and left. We know ourselves, we received innumerable amounts of credit card offers, and I can't help but wonder if the consumption in this country isn't currently based on the fact that we're all living on borrowed money. And so consequently, maybe that's why the economy seems healthy at this time, because there's no doubt about the fact that neither salary increases or anything else has kept up with the rate of inflation from year to year.
Well, I have another possibility to suggest to you, caller, and that is that we spend a great deal, consume a great deal, because we tax savings in this country. Other countries have other ideas about what it is you should tax, maybe we ought to be looking at that. Maybe all things are possible in this new world that will be controlled by the Republicans. Maybe reform of the tax system is one of them. Dick Armey has a wonderful idea for a flat tax, which when I first saw it, I thought was so remote a possibility that it didn't even bear looking at, and now it's clearly on the table and very exciting.
I hope so. I think the advantage of a flat tax would be, whatever its short-term effects on the economy, beneficial in one respect for sure, which is it would abolish the parasitic class of people whose job it is now to fix people's tax returns, principally rich people's tax returns, so they don't have to pay any. And getting rid of that and allowing, this was also Jerry Brown's proposal, deductions only for rent, mortgage, and excuse me, charitable donation would be a huge reform of two kinds and long overdue.
Racism is alive and growing in America. It is the insidious undercurrent, unspoken, hush-hush drive behind every social decision that is made in this country. President Clinton came into office trying to represent all the people, much to the distress of the white American male. Then he tried, for the good of all the people, to tame the gun-toting, the smokers, the often errant press, and voila, democracy supposedly is destroyed. Why is it that no one is saying how very close most of these elections of 1994 were, with all the anti-Clinton slander that has driven every news media for the last 2 years, and taking into account how the downtrodden and poor no longer bother to come out, and the realization that only, I believe it's 18% of the voting public voted. That's 30, well, say 10% voted. How in the world can the Republicans be claiming this great mandate? The anger on both sides now has been heightened to the point where an explosion is inevitable.
Let me just respond to the one thing in that letter that I think is valuable, that is his noting that the races, many of the races were close. He's right. Many of the races were close. Some of them razor thin. Sam Gageson in Connecticut, Democrat, won by 4 votes. You know, it would be a mistake for Republicans to say, you know, the millennium has come and we're never going to be challenged again. That's not correct. It's not correct that liberalism is dead. It's just suffered a rebuke. Now, that much having been said, it is also the case that what was once the solid Democratic South is becoming the solid Republican South, and the governors who are doing a good job at conservative governance in big Midwestern states, which were traditionally Democratic, are getting overwhelmingly reelected. So it doesn't, you know, while things are not, while the Democratic Party is not dead and liberalism isn't gone, it's definitely on the ropes.
Well, certainly racism is still a problem, and the fact that someone like Jesse Helms, who opposed the Martin Luther King national holiday on the grounds that King was a communist, should be the beneficiary of this process, should give anyone pause. I think, though, that a better term for what was revealed in some of the races would probably be chauvinism or xenophobia. Things like the proposition on immigration in California and the politicians who play on it that show that in times of scarcity, the easiest thing to do with the voters is to try and turn them upon one another and to try and look for scapegoats and so forth. That's why I also, to revert to my constant theme of the morning, think that the most interesting debates at the moment are within the conservative movement. And the debate, there's a very good issue of the current National Review on this, between Jack Kemp and Bill Bennett, who opposed this immigration proposition, and the Republicans who supported it, is one that's well worth watching and is going to tell you a lot about the way we're going to go.
Houston, thanks for waiting.
Yes. First, I want to say something to Queen Mona. Let 'em eat cake, Mona. Who represents 5% of the population. I want everybody to know and to keep in mind that only 1% of our budget goes to welfare. Now, she and Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh can just pound our brains as long as they want to, but that's not, welfare is not our biggest problem. And I would like for them to talk to the issues. That interview that you had with Friedman last night on big government, I wish you would have asked him some pertinent questions about big government and who benefits from big government. And what else do I have to say? I would like for Mr. Christopher to speak up. He's my kind of liberal.
It's kind of quiet this morning. You notice that?
Yeah, I'm feeling a bit tame.
All right, what's wrong with you this morning?
Well,
he's happy.
Of course it's true about the welfare. Of course it's true about the exaggerations about welfare, and so that's an old story. Perhaps I take too much for granted in thinking that everyone already knows that Reagan and the food stamp queens and all that stuff has been gone over so often. It's a scare tactic, and it has a racial element in it, I think, as well.
Let's go over it one more time.
No, where the shoe is going to pinch is when the Republicans come to award the contracts back to the defense contractors who back them, using public money to support the tremendous boondoggles like the Star Wars fantasy and so forth, and then people are going to have to pay real money. Then I think there will be a great disillusionment, and they'll realize who really is on the public tit and who is not.
Okay, let's deal with this one more time. Welfare is 1% of the budget. That is not correct. There are at least 100 different welfare programs in the budget. The aid to families with dependent children is several $billion, Medicaid is several $billion, food stamps is several $billion. 1 out of 10 Americans receives food stamps. It is a huge federal program. Now, that much having been said, it is also the case that people who are panting for some kind of welfare reform are not doing so primarily on a budgetary basis. They're not doing so because they feel, well, look at all this money we'll save. They're doing it because they feel that creating a permanent dependent class in this country, people who never work and have never known anybody who worked, and who do not marry and who have children at the times before they're ready to have them, is a corrosive thing, and that it is corrupting a segment of our population and maybe the whole society, by inference. And that is why people are extremely worried about the welfare system. It is not really the money, though the money is substantial.
Los Angeles. Thank you for waiting.
Yes, had a question primarily directed towards Mona with regards to Bill Clinton, that, you know, he avoided the draft, obviously. Now, I noticed that a lot of the young Republican Turks that are coming up seem to be very strong military, but you take Phil Gramm and Newt Gingrich also, they avoided the draft. And I wonder, are they going to be open up to the same type of derision and contempt that Bill Clinton was? Because the way I see it, they're all phonies, Republicans and Democrats. They're all phonies when it comes to these issues.
Depends how they handle it, caller. I mean, the reason that Bill Clinton was the subject of so much derision, whereas other candidates, other Democrats who didn't serve were not, is because he was so slippery about it and said inconsistent things on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Did he receive a draft notice or did he not? He lied about it. That's why he was the subject of derision, not just because he didn't serve.
Have to agree with that. I mean, I think probably the noblest moment in Bill Clinton's life was when he refused to join in the war of aggression against Vietnam, and to state in his letter quite good reasons for doing so.
What would you
his failure to stand up to that later on, his attempt to disown the only brave thing he ever did, I think, and to lie and tell different stories about that each time, meant that he lost the respect both of those who were for the war, who had no doubt their own honourable reasons for that, and those who, vindicated by history, were dead against it from the start. Nobody could respect Bill Clinton's position or personality on that issue.
Let me ask you both quickly about this fact from...
about what?
That's all right. I want to get to this fact. Jesse Helms' irresponsible and outrageous remark that President Clinton is not up to the job of Commander-in-Chief, and the insinuation that the military officials, unnamed, agree should embarrass fair-minded Republicans, or have I just come up with an oxymoron? I really enjoyed listening to your comments. Christopher.
Well, the terrible thing about Helms is I think that he might well be telling the truth. There have had to be a couple of disciplinary moments for insubordinate officers who have publicly abused the president and suggested that civilian control is something that they can take or leave. I think, in fact, Bill Clinton's first collapse, first betrayal, first real failure was his refusal to assert civilian control over the military on Haiti, on the rights of homosexuals to serve in the military, and on a number of other things. He let the Joint Chiefs act as if they were policymakers.
What did you think of Jesse Helms' comments?
I didn't see them, but look, I think what we're dealing with here is a certain level of disrespect toward President Clinton, and that's what's reflected. And I actually think that President Clinton brought this on himself because he doesn't behave with dignity and bearing. He tells us what kind of underwear he wears. He's constantly blabbing on every subject under the sun. If he had a little bit more reserve and a little bit more dignity in the way he carried himself, he wouldn't be the victim of these kinds of...
I'm surprised you managed to miss the Helms remarks, though. That's not like you. I mean, I'm not going to unsay anything I've said about Clinton. That picture of him modeling batik shirts on the front lawn of the Indonesian dictator, he looked like nothing on earth, president of nowhere at all. I agree. The fact is, though, Jesse Helms has to be put in his place about this, and so do the military guys who probably are whispering in his ear. This kind of talk from this kind of uncultured bum and thug ought to be reproved strongly. And actually, it's time we heard from Mr. Gingrich about it, I think.
Westerville, Ohio. Go ahead, please.
Hey, good morning.
Morning.
Brian.
Yes, sir.
Wardrobe. You
Yes.
gotta change that suit. Wardrobe.
Whatever you say, pal. Coming up.
I'm just kidding. Listen, Jesse Helms, he didn't call a press conference and jump on Bill Clinton. I seen what he said. One of these liberal news people asked him, "What do you think?"
Robert Novak now is a liberal news media.
Presidents can lead, and he just said, "Well, he didn't think so." It wasn't like he did what the people are saying that he did. What I was calling about is this white men issue that they're trying to put out. I'm a little bit nervous too. You even said it. This lady even said it a minute ago, and that's been started by the feminists, and it's a Southern white, and that started after the election or just during the election. And what it means, it's a little racial thing, trying to get some stuff going. Newt Gingrich is from the South. All these white people, that's Jesse Helms And that's what it's about. And they're trying to start a racial thing again.
Mona Charen?
If I understand the caller correctly, I think I agree with him that the Democrats, quite desperate this year as the tallies began to come in, the polling data, attempted to pull out the last refuge of the scoundrel in American politics today, which is the race card. Being played by the Democrats. You know, Charles Rangel in New York said that anybody who's in favor of tax cuts is racist. He said they may not wear a hood and a white suit, but they wear a tie and they wear a suit and a red tie, Brian, and that's racism. So I agree with the caller that attempting to inject race into this was completely contemptible.
Trying to keep it out is pretty difficult, though. I mean, let's bear in mind this. Sorry, Joe, excuse me. This Republican sweep in the South is the consummation of a process that was begun when Richard Nixon noticed that George Wallace could split the Democratic coalition, and certainly the original motive for the Republican Southern strategy was unabashedly a racist one. Let's just hope that it can outgrow its roots, but that's what the roots of it were, and Nixon made it perfectly explicit at the time.
You mentioned President Clinton's shirt that we have a picture of here over on his trip. Now, would you not have worn that if you're the president, as the custom of their country?
And it wasn't the custom of the country. They were modeling these shirts at the request of an Indonesian businessman when they should have been. And Clinton looks, he reminds me of what Gore Vidal said about Teddy Kennedy. You know what that was?
I do not.
All the charm of 250 pounds of condemned veal. When he should have been discussing with these characters why it is that their army uses American weapons to massacre and repress the people of East Timor, a subject that he tried to avoid. I thought it was utterly horrible. And then from that podium to say that, after all, maybe Gingrich had a point about school prayer, I thought completed the picture perfectly.
Bradford, Pennsylvania. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Hi.
Listen, I got a suggestion for you, Brian. Could you have some economists on to explain this hoax that the Republicans are going to do?
Sure.
I mean, wouldn't that be like in other words, they should be able to answer if the Republicans can cut taxes and all this other stuff. I think, you know, they should be able to answer it.
There'll be a lot of talk about this between now and January the 4th.
I want to ask Mona some questions.
Right ahead.
Let's talk about fiscal responsibility, Mona, with President Reagan. Do you think he was fiscal responsible?
Every budget that Reagan sent up to the Congress was declared dead on arrival.
It was, but he ran on a balanced budget amendment. Did he ever send a balanced budget amendment down?
No, because it was impossible with the Democrats controlling the Congress.
Oh.
But it became, you know, the mood has been shifting. Ronald Reagan changed the terms of debate in this country dramatically, and the effects are still being seen. Whereas a balanced budget amendment was inconceivable when Reagan was president, by the time Clinton became president, just in the last 2 years, a balanced budget amendment almost passed the Congress controlled by Democrats, and I think you will see it pass a Congress controlled by conservative Republicans.
First trillion dollar budget. He had pork on defense that was unbelievable.
Well, caller, let me respond to that, because you're right. The defense budget is full of pork. Any government budget is going to be full of pork, because people never spend your money and my money the way they spend their own money. So why don't we just accept that as a fact of life, and then look at cutting all of it except for the most essential roles of government. Otherwise, you're going to wind up spending trillions and trillions of your dollars and everybody else's to do a lot of unnecessary things in the military and on the civilian side.
Mr. Hitchens, U.S. News has another one of your favorite pictures here this morning.
Of our favorite model, male model.
Well, they're all of them, though. They all have them on.
Yeah, they were all asked to do a favor for this Batik entrepreneur.
Would you wear one of these?
It's what they do at these, if I was invited to the summit in the first place, unlikely assumption, no, I wouldn't.
Olympia, Washington, go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Lamb.
Morning.
Thank you for taking my call. First, I want to say, Mr. Hitchens, I'm your biggest fan. I have your books, and Ms. Charen, it takes more than dignity to be a president. a lot of them are so arrogant, and as the press is an example, and you're one of the prime examples. But Mr. Hitchens, I want to ask you the truth about GATT. I read The Nation and I believe The Nation. But could you tell us the truth about GATT? Because I don't know what to believe, but I'm against GATT, and Ralph Nader's against it. Thank you for taking my call again.
Yeah, well, I'm for free trade, as was Karl Marx, and I think that it's a non-ideological question in a sense, because what tends to happen is the countries that are in decline favor protectionism, and countries that are stronger, very often that built up their industries by protection, tend to favor free trade. There are inequities in it, but there isn't really any alternative to it, and protectionism isn't one. I think myself it was a big mistake of Clinton's, what should we say, critics on the left and in the labor movement to make their first disagreement with the administration one on NAFTA. I think that was a tremendous waste of energy and a huge political miscalculation. And I think the same would be true of opposition to GATT. I'm sorry if I've disappointed you.
Let me ask you both, and I'll ask you for an answer later. What issue do you, if passed by a Newt Gingrich-led Congress and a Bob Dole-led Senate, will tell you that this is a change? The first issue where you'll say, yeah, this is going to be a different place. Washington, D.C., go ahead, please.
Good morning, Brian. If you wouldn't mind holding up the cartoon in the Washington Times this morning on the editorial page, A22.
Well, let me see if I can find it. I got the paper all torn up here, but I'll try to find it.
It'll summarize what I want to talk about.
All right, hold on just a second. Let me get it right. There you go. Is that what you want to see?
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet, but yes, sir, that's it. I would. This is almost a beach ball to pitch to Mona now that she needs it, and I hope Mr. Hitchens won't rip it apart before it gets there.
Let me first tell the audience, this is Mayor Barry and the new mayor-to-be of Washington, D.C., and this is Eleanor Holmes Norton, the representative from the District of Columbia.
Right, and I'm a homeowner here in the district, and there's a secessionist movement to retrocede a part of Washington, D.C. back to Maryland, and the people in Maryland don't want us, and we're wanted here because of our property tax base in this part of the city to keep this largesse and liberal experiment in nonsense going. And
you're talking about Ward 3, which is the predominantly white area of Washington, D.C.?
Well, I hate to say it's predominantly white. It probably is. I haven't gone out and counted, and I'm being naive to say it isn't. But, the point is, this is the tax base of the city, and that's really what this is about. Now, others will, and I don't accuse you of that, want to make, well, Marion Barry will play the race card because that's how he gets where he is. But the point is that if people expect big government to continue, they've got to come up with a way of financing it, because those of us who are pulling the wagon aren't going to pull it any longer. And you can call it Ward 3 or wherever. It's every city in the country probably right now. That's what this whole election is about.
All right, I'm going to let you go. I think the point's made. What's your response to it?
Well, there's that Phil Graham phrase, which I thought the first time I heard it would resonate, and I was right, because I keep hearing it again and again. The image of the people pulling the wagon and those riding in it, if you have a lot of people riding in the wagon and a lot pulling it, you're all right. But when you get too many riding and not enough pulling, you've got a severe problem.
Can Ward 3 in the district secede from the district and go with Maryland?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think Maryland would take them, but otherwise, it might be a real problem, and it might restrain some of the more radical proposals.
Do you live in Ward 3, Mr.
Yeah, and I know, yes, and a lot of white people in Ward 3 are doing quite as much riding as pulling. Thank you very much. They ride pretty nicely, and I'm not particularly impressed by their self-pity. I do think, though, that it is a great shame that Jesse Jackson refused finally to run for mayor of the district. I think it would have been great, and I think it's a real shame that we're left with this mediocre racial opportunist, Mr. Barry, as a result.
Towson, Maryland, you're next.
Good morning, C-SPAN.
Hi.
A couple of comments and questions. Brian, first off, on the book notes show, I think it's important that you start from a level higher up than, say, the third grade. As far as we have an hour and a half to ask questions, and it seems like you spend time asking who was Abraham Lincoln and things like that. When you have great authors on there, and you should try to get a little bit more detail in the limited time you have. As far as Ms. Charen, it's a great honor to speak with you. I especially been watching the Capitol game the last couple weeks, and I like the way you've been handling Al Hunt. I can tell he's very, very upset about the recent elections, and it doesn't look any better for him. My comment, basically, I think the only thing holding up Bill Clinton right now is the liberal media and the Dan Rathers, the Peter Jennings, the Tom Brokaws of the world. And they will abandon him in the end as well. But right now, they are grasping at straws or straw men. Mr. Hitchens, I don't know what you had to drink last night, but I hope you feel better by this afternoon. Seem to be a little under the weather. But I guess the recent election gives any diehard liberal like yourself reason to drink.
Thanks.
So I don't think it calls for any comment. Anyway, I would probably only slur it if I did.
Denver, Colorado. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. Good morning.
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 My question to you is this, and Mona, I adore you.
Oh, thanks.
I want each one of you to answer this for me. Vladimir Zhirinovsky, what do you see there, and what do you think the future of him is in Russia, and what effect will this have on us?
Thanks.
Well, I think Vladimir Zhirinovsky is probably so crazy and so unhappy, and to take a line from the previous questioner, so alcoholic that he probably will not succeed in becoming the Führer of a Russian Reich. But I think he's drawn attention to the fact that there do exist in the former Soviet Union potentials, at any rate, for a religious Orthodox, right-wing, xenophobic revival of the sort that took over former Yugoslavia in the form of the Milosevic dictatorship, which has been an inspiration to Mr. Zhirinovsky too, and that this needs watching. But I don't think it won't take the predicted form.
Mr. Zhirinovsky?
Just another stepchild of communism. You know, the 70 years of the worst totalitarianism this world has ever seen have left a country without any democratic traditions whatsoever, and thoroughly corrupt, with frightening, nutty characters. And you know, the lesson, even though people say this is fairly obvious, it's worth repeating: keep your powder dry. You never know what's going to be happening with that country.
Shelton, Connecticut. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning, Brian. It is a joy to talk to you. I've tried many, many times just to speak to you and your guests, but I thank you for the ones that are on your program this morning. Mona, you are tremendous. I think that you have it by the handle, and just keep knocking it, okay? We really depend on people that are able to speak their mind and truth. Mr. Hitchens, I've heard him before, and it tells it all. He is a Marxist, and, you know, he would support GATT. You know what I despise of all things, Mona, is that they've stolen my country. That's why I despise the politicians. When I look at this great nation and what made this nation great, we have the socialist Marxists that are telling us, go this way, and we say no. We want our Constitution to hold. We want all the benefits for all Americans. But if we're looking at those that have been elected, and if we in Connecticut, excuse me, are doing the same thing, we weren't as successful as many other states, but however, we're working on it because we're really quite a liberal state, as you know. But when we look at those politicians that were elected in this last election, if they do not adhere to what the people are calling for, they want their country back. We want a democracy, but more important, we want a republic. And that's the message they better get. We don't want socialism. We don't Marxism, because that is okay in England, as Mr. Hitchens belongs. And as he was educated in Oxford, this is the training that they come to America espousing their Marxist beliefs, and we say no. And if the politicians do not understand what we're saying, there will be another time. And if that doesn't work, maybe it's going to be revolution.
All right. Thank you. And response.
Not necessary, I don't think.
We've got a couple faxes here that come down on both sides. We're all enjoying the callers and the faxes this morning. If you think that Al Hunt was hard on you, don't. You got off easy compared to what you would have faced if I were on the Capitol gang. Please watch your own appearances and see how you come across to those of us who approach a discussion with civility. Bill Clinton is still the president, and Newt Gingrich is still a mean-spirited hick with a whiny voice who is trying to act like an emperor. I'm a 64-year-old retired Marine, a Republican, and an American. Your ideas turn me off. Dan Keefe. Do you have any response to Mr. Keefe?
No.
This is from Mahmoud Esat Ozan. Speaking of the dinosaur, one is sitting right across America this morning. Christopher represents a dead or at least dying philosophy. He's been hitching his wagon to the wrong star all these many years. He should have chosen Groucho instead of Carl, by the way. We all love Mona Charen. She's like a bit of fresh air in the, I guess, I don't know. I can't read it. Reaction?
It would be ungallant to quarrel with that, I think.
This is one of those days. Worcester, excuse me, folks, Thanksgiving week. Worcester, Massachusetts. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, folks. Brian, believe me, you're dressed just fine.
Thanks.
Although I think Christopher is clearly the best-dressed one there.
It's the most interesting, I think. He hasn't explained his buttons yet again this morning.
Yeah, tell them about your buttons.
One more time, please.
Well,
this is the emblem of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the golden one is a bunch of grapes. I don't know if you can see it clearly. It's a kind of battlefield decoration that I earned from a wine waiter in Washington.
Well, your sartorial eloquence is quite splendid. I have a few brief comments, and I'll hang up and let you all respond. I think we should heed young Woodrow Wilson's long-ago call for establishing a parliamentary system in this country, and Gore Vidal's recent call for radical devolution of political power away from Washington, for example, into 8 or 9 regional parliaments and a national parliament overall, a la Canada or Germany. We certainly need a left-center populist party that embraces social justice but rejects Leviathan statism. The cutting-edge political issues of the next 7 years will be labor issues, hours, salary, working conditions embraced by a downwardly mobile middle class. And Newt, Jesse, and Strom are classic examples of the inverse ratio between the size of the mouth and the size of the brain. Thank you all so much, and have a good morning.
Ms. Charen?
I'm going to leave aside the lighter things that the caller said and just respond to the notion that we either ought to switch to a parliamentary system or we ought to have 9 regional parliaments and so on. You know, one of the things that liberals don't understand is that tradition plays a very important role in a country's life, a stabilizing role. And one of the reasons that, you know, that this system has succeeded insofar as it has over the 200 years of our history is that we have tried with greater and lesser success to stick to the outline that the founders gave us in the Constitution. You don't go tampering with something like that lightly.
The parliamentary system in Britain is not the model I would propose for America to follow, though it has often occurred to me that it would be nice to have a question time of the sort that you sometimes show from Canada or from London, where the president or the chief executive or someone speaking for him has to go into the chamber without a script and answer some tough questions from the floor. That was at one stage proposed to Lincoln during the Civil War by Congress, that he'd come and do this, and he was too artful to fall for that and pleaded national security.
It was also proposed by this president, and the Speaker of the House said no.
Yes, that's right.
Do you think Newt Gingrich would say yes?
I'd love to see what he would say, and I think it's a challenge that should be put to him.
You're not going to forget the change question, are you, Brian? Should I answer it now?
Sure.
Okay. The question was, how will we know that there really has been change in Washington? My answer is 2 things. One is if the flat tax goes anywhere. And 2, if there is a reform passed by this Congress saying that no individual congressman, and this is being talked about, can attach a rider to any bill that earmarks funds for his district.
Last call, Oakland, California. Go ahead, please.
Hi, great show this morning.
Thanks.
Mr. Hitchens, do you have any idea about how the Democratic Party reinvigorates itself after this?
No, I don't. I hope, as I've hoped for a long time, that it splits, and that there'll be a left opposition alternative party.
We have a fact
that will draw upon the libertarian tradition synthesized. We'd probably have a collective leadership, but I'd be willing to be
drafted.
Yeah. No, seriously. I mean, I think that's the only hope now.
We have a fax.
It's gone the way of the Whigs.
We have a fax, I think, that will wrap up this program.
Mm-hmm.
It's from Dr. Gordon Freeberg. He's a retired United Methodist minister, Iowa Conference, and this comes from Cedar Rapids. As a retired United Methodist minister, I am not as concerned about returning school prayer to the schools because, as you and many have said, inner prayers are always heard by the Lord, and no one can stop that. I haven't said that. He must be addressing it to one of you two. Let me just say this. Here's his paragraph point here. What really disturbs me is the prayer held in the House and the Senate each opening day by the House chaplain and the Senate chaplain, who we understand from respective journals receive clergy salaries of $143,000 a year, and both hold down huge expense accounts running in the neighborhood of $300,000.
Okay, here's another reform idea from this faxer. Why don't we have, local clergy from the Washington area come in on a rotating basis?
But let me just ask you seriously, though, how can people, I mean, I sound like I'm on one side or the other, but how can you have two chaplains and say a prayer every day in the House and the Senate and then be opposed to having school prayer in the schools?
I don't think you can. I don't think you should have them in the Senate or the House either. Well, no, nor do I think it should be in the Pledge of Allegiance or on the money.
Those who,
I think the separation of church and state means what it says. What I really would like to ask is, why is it that it has to be in the schools? Why don't they want prayer in the trains, or prayer on the floor of the stock exchange at the beginning of every day's business, or prayer on the factory floor? They're telling you right away what we want is control over children. And that should really be all you need to know about the agenda, so to speak, of the people who are calling for this ludicrous proposal.
Now, the people who oppose school prayer will frequently say that the reason it's okay in the Congress but not in the school is that the congressman is full of adults, of course, big assumption there, but you see, what they're really worried about is that a child might be influenced. A child might actually believe in God as a consequence of this, and we can't have that.
Last comment from a fax from Edward Stein of Tampa, Florida. Great program. These are two of my favorite guests. They are each intellectually honest to their own beliefs with a minimum of spin and posturing. Do you believe that?
I'd rather he said it than no.
Mona Charen, syndicated columnist with Creators Syndicate, incorporated in how many papers now nationwide?
About 150, I think.
Livingston, New Jersey native, was with the National Review, wrote speeches for Jack Kemp for a little bit, and Christopher Hitchens is a columnist with Vanity Fair and The Nation, is from England originally, is an Oxford graduate, and has a lot of books out there, including the one that we did on Book Notes, For the Sake of Argument.
Which, thanks to you, is in paperback now, as of this month, and available at fine bookstores everywhere.
Thank you both for joining us. Have a nice week and a Thanksgiving Day.
Every Monday morning at 8 Eastern Time, we invite columnists and commentators to join us for a discussion of the major stories making the weekend headlines and in the morning's newspapers. Tonight, we'll be joined on a call-in program by Senator Thad Cochran. The Mississippi Republican is heading up a working group handling the Republican transition and setting out a legislative agenda for the new Senate. Our call-in begins at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Students use C-SPAN as a resource for studying the federal government. Our coverage of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches provides the student with an in-depth, unfiltered view of the public policy process at work. If you're an educator and want to learn how your class may benefit from our programming, join C-SPAN in the Classroom, a free membership support service. For information, write C-SPAN in the Classroom, 400 North Capitol Street Northwest, Suite 650, Washington, D.C., 20001.
Next, Senators Phil Gramm of Texas and Larry Craig of Idaho speak to a conference hosted by the National Taxpayers Union and other organizations. The Republican lawmakers preview the new Congress and the Republican agenda. The Taxpayers Union is a non-profit organization that lobbies for lower taxes and fiscal responsibility. This event lasts about 1 hour.
May I have your attention, please? We are going to keep this show on the road and on time, and to do that, we're going to let you go right ahead and finish your desserts while Senator Graham has very kindly agreed to go ahead and start and let you enjoy the rest of your meal. In fact, he will help you enjoy it even more. It's my privilege to introduce a prominent citizen of Texas who lately has been spending more time in my state of Iowa than in Texas. Now, I am grateful that Senator Graham has discovered God's country, though some question why one would want to apply for Iowa citizenship when Texas has no income tax, and while we're reducing the Iowa income tax, it is still very high. So I suspect there must be some other reason. I'm working hard trying to figure out what it is. In any event, we welcome him every time he comes to Iowa. Need to know a couple of things about Senator Phil Graham. He receives the grade of A, taxpayer's friend, in the National Taxpayers Union complete pro-taxpayer voting scorecard, and he is in the top 10 group of the entire United States Senate. When he changed political parties, he did not only change political parties, I think his view was the parties changed rather than he. He resigned from then the House of Representatives, went back to Texas, filed as a candidate for the vacant seat to give the citizens the chance to decide whether they wanted him to represent them under a new party label, which they resoundingly did and have continued to do. And I've always respected him for that. Now, you do have to know that Senator Graham suffers from two extremely serious ailments. They are ailments that are endemic in the countryside, out where Dickie Flat lives and Iowa and other places, but they are ailments that have been, up until now, exceedingly rare in the nation's capital. They are called logic and common sense. We think they are becoming more endemic beginning in January, even here. You need to know, when my wife and I co-speak to meetings, Jeannie is the one who always quotes the IRS agent who said, the trick is to stop thinking of it as your money. Senator Phil Graham has the audacity to believe the money belongs to the people, not to the government, and that the government itself, believe it or not, belongs to the people. I'm proud to introduce a great friend of the taxpayers, Senator Phil Graham.
Thank you very much, David. I'm spending all of that time in Iowa because I want every American to have a government as good as the government we have in Texas. Tuesday, a week ago, God smiled on America, and in looking at the election results, it seems to me that the smile was seen almost equally in every part of our great land, and we rejoice in it. The Democrats have tried in every way possible to spin this election as anything other than what it was. This election was a total and absolute rejection of everything the Clinton administration has stood for and done in the last 2 years. And when the American people re-elected every Republican running for re-election in the House and Senate, and every Republican running for re-election for governor, and defeated Democrats wholesale, they were saying, stop the taxing, the spending, and the regulating, which have been the hallmarks of the Clinton administration. And I wanted to come here to tell you today, so help me God, that taxing, that spending, and that regulating is going to stop beginning January the 3rd. Now, I guess that I have been asked 1,000 times whether or not Republicans are going to work with Bill Clinton. Now, let me make it clear. I do not believe that the American people, for the first time in 40 years, elected a Republican majority to both houses of Congress so that we could suddenly start acting like Democrats. I do not believe that the American people gave us a majority so that we could raise taxes half as much as Bill Clinton wants to raise them, so that we could increase spending half as much as Bill Clinton wants to increase spending, so that we could increase the regulatory burden just half as much as the president wants. I am not interested in going halfway or part way in the wrong direction. I am ready to go in the right direction. So if the president heard the same mandate we did, and he wants to get on the train in a new mission with a new philosophy, he's had several of those. And he wants to be engineer, great. If he wants to wave from the station, we'll wave back. If he wants to get on the tracks and try to stop the train, we can live with that. But let me tell you, Bill Clinton was not the only loser in this election. Big government was also the loser in this election. For the first time in my adult life, we had a referendum on big government, and big government lost. Now, you all heard the president in the campaign pounding the podium, talking about Republicans saying no. Let me, as we begin to chart a new course, say, I am proud of all the no votes that I cast in the last Congress. Sometimes no is the right answer. When you're on the wrong road, going in the wrong direction, speeding up doesn't help you. You have to do what my wife unkindly says that my gender hates to do. Admit you're lost. Stop. Get out of the car. Get directions. Get back in the car. Turn around. Get back on the right road. More than anything else, the 103rd Congress is going to be remembered as the Congress that killed socialized medicine. And let me say, I wear it as a great badge of honor that when every major Republican pollster said that it was political suicide to take on the Clinton health care plan head on, that when I kept hearing the president get up and say it is a great idea to tear down the greatest health care system the world has ever known and reinvent it in the image of the post office, I stood up and said, not only no, but hell no. But I want you to know that I am tired of saying no. I've got still some no's in me, if they're needed, but I am ready to say yes. I am ready to say yes to a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution of the United States. We're going to swear in our new members. We're going to have 11 new members of the Senate that are going to be sworn in the first week in January, and all of them are Republicans. And just as they take their left hand off the Bible, I want to bring up a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Now, you heard in the campaign, and you're going to hear it over again, you're going to hear Bill Clinton say, it will be the end of life as we know it on the planet if the federal government has to live on a budget like everybody else. Well, it will be the end of life as he and the Democrats have known it on the planet, but it will be the beginning of a good and better life for the people who do the work and pay the taxes and pull the wagon in this country. And when so many working families facing a very tight budget, a budget that is tight in part because the federal government has not had a tight budget in 50 years, when they have to every day say no to people they love, it is about time that politicians in Washington started being forced to say no for a change, and they're going to be forced to do that when we adopt a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. I want to reform the welfare system, and I want to reform it by asking the 40 million people that are riding in the wagon to get out of the wagon and help the rest of us pull. I want a mandatory work requirement in the private sector of the economy. I want to change our labor laws to make it possible for people on welfare to go out and take any job, the best job they can get. And if they work and they have trouble, we're going to help them. And if they don't work, they're going to have to work. And we are going to stop giving people more and more money to have more and more children once they're on welfare. And I want to reform the welfare system not just because it costs at the state and federal level $301 billion a year. Those are good reasons. They're not my reasons. Never in history have we taken so much money away from the people pulling the wagon and given so much money to people that are riding in the wagon and made both groups worse off simultaneously. And if we are going to save our country, we are going to have to change the welfare system. And all the people who are riding in the wagon are going to grumble, and the people that are steering the wagon are going to scream when we ask them to get out of the wagon and help us pull. But if we love the people who have been denied access to the American dream, who have had their incentives crushed by a system that takes away incentives, that have had their values and their morality corroded by a system that corrodes values and morality, we're going to have the courage to change welfare. And I believe that if we set out to change the system, that we ought to be able to reduce the amount of money spent on welfare, benefits to people who are not elderly and not disabled, in 5 years with a real reform program that is based on work and not welfare. We ought to be able to cut those programs by 50%, and that's my objective. I want to get one more crack at this crime bill. The idea of spending $30 billion on social programs with the idea that social programs prevent crime is crazy when you think about it. If social spending prevented crime, this would already be the safest spot on the planet. I want to take all that money away from midnight basketball and this innovative program in Rhode Island that retrains graffiti violators to be mural artists. And I want to spend that money grabbing violent criminals by the throat. I want to stop building prisons like Holiday Inns. I want to change the wage and hour laws so that we can make people in prison work. Every year, Jesse Helms offers an amendment to ban trade with nations that use labor from people who are in prison. And every year I say, well, why don't we do it? This year we're going to start. And I want to change the contract between the people and the government. I offered an amendment last year, the budget, which most people in the media called a radical amendment because it was a radical amendment. And I was trying to make a point, and it's just amazing. It's these Democrats, many of whom are now defeated, have a Pavlovian reaction when you talk about working people getting to keep their own money. I offered an amendment that would have taken discretionary spending in the Department of Education, Health and Human Services, and HUD and independent agencies and cut their budgets across the board and use the money to double the dependent exemption for children so that families, instead of being able to protect the grand sum of $2,300 per child from taxation, the amount they need, of course, to feed, house, clothe, and nurture each child. I wanted to double that to $4,600 a year. And just as I thought he would, Jim Sasser jumped up and said, Phil Gramm wants to cut spending for education, housing, and nutrition. And so I got up and said, hey, I'm not talking about cutting spending for those things. I'm talking about changing who is doing the spending. You want the government to do the spending. I want the family to do the spending. You know the government, and you know the family. I know the government, I know the family, and I know the difference. And I believe that when families get to keep more of their own money to invest in their own children, to invest in their own future, that we are going to be a richer, freer, and happier people. And starting this year, because the American people changed government, we are going to start making those changes. If you went out almost anywhere in America and you asked people, what is unique about America? I think most people would say, well, in America, we have limited government and we have had unlimited opportunity. Because we have had limited government, we have lived in a country where ordinary people like you and me have had more opportunity and more freedom than any other people who've ever lived. And as a result, ordinary people like us have been able to do extraordinary things. And yet, while we all know that, while it's almost an article of faith in America, if you look back at the last 40 years without ever making a conscious decision to do it, every time we have had a problem, real or imagined, we have ended up sending more of our money to Washington. We have ended up giving up more of our freedom. And what have we gotten for it? We've gotten a government that is bigger. We've gotten a government that is more expensive. We've gotten a government that is more distant. And we have gotten a government that is more hostile. But Are we more secure today than we were 40 years ago? Is the future brighter for our children today than it was 40 years ago? I think the answer to those questions is no. And I think what the American people started saying in this election, and it will deliver on our mandate, they will say even more clearly in the next election, is that we want our money back, we want our freedom back, and we want our country back. And with your help, we are going to help America get all those things back. I want to thank you for all you have done in standing up for the forgotten people of America. As Larry Craig, your next speaker, can tell you, every time we vote on a spending bill, all the groups who want something for nothing are looking over our left shoulder, sending letters back home telling people whether you care as a congressman or senator about the old, the poor, the sick, the tired, the bicycle rider, and the list goes on and on. Very few groups are looking over our right shoulder telling people whether the congressman cares about the working people, cares about the people who do the work and pay the taxes and pull the wagon. Your group is one of those groups, and I want to say thank you very much for caring. And with your work in getting the facts out and your work in this election, thank you for caring enough to send the very best. I have not totally deviated from my background as a school teacher to be brief. I like to say I'm often introduced that I taught for 12 years, taught economics at Texas A&M. I have tried to teach the same subject in Congress for 15 years. Aggies are a lot smarter than these people I'm working with now. But I have a feeling we have just raised the standards with this new class coming in, and I am eager, as I'm sure you are, to give them their first test. Let me stop. I've got about 7 minutes. I'd be very happy to try to answer a few questions. Yes, sir.
During the market for radical ideas, how would you feel about simply freezing the total level of federal spending? Not how you subdivide it, but freeze the total amount at $1.5 trillion, and in 3 years you will balance the budget.
Well, one of the things that is always very instructive is to try to explain to people that government is the principal beneficiary of economic growth in America, and that revenues are increasing to the government under anything like normal circumstances, and that the principal task of fiscal responsibility with a growing economy is controlling the growth of government spending. I believe that it would be a very effective goal to set out an aggregate freeze in government spending, to go back and apply what I call the Dickey-Flatt test, which many of you have heard me talk about. Think about some hard-working person who really works for a living like my printer in Mahia named Dickey-Flatt, who never quite gets that blue ink off the end of his fingers. Look at the programs, ask whether it's worth taking the money away from Dickey-Flatt to pay for it. It wouldn't take much of that to dramatically change the course of American history. I think it's important that people understand two things. Number one, if we don't change the policy of our government dramatically and soon, we're going to lose our country. But it is also important for people to understand that if the American government with its problems was a business or was a family, it would be a modest restructuring that would be called for. This is a crisis only because we have a government that has not told any organized group no for 40 years. And your point is a very good point. If we can simply do what businesses and families have to do every day, set priorities, say no, deny doing things you want to do but that you can't afford, this is a problem that can be dealt with. This is a struggle that can be The answer is yes. I am the radical idea. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Few departments in government have given us less of what we wanted, provided us with fewer problems than the Department of Education. Would you consider just dismantling the U.S. Department of Education?
Well, let me say, you may not be aware of this, but most of the government office space in Washington, D.C. is leased. We don't own a lot of these buildings, even the head offices of many of these government agencies. And I think it would be a great thing to go back and look at the Department of Education if we don't own that building. Maybe we ought to have a Republican press conference down there the first week of the new Congress, get out the lease and say, we will not renew this lease. And we will let the people that have the biggest stake control education. Parents, teachers, locally elected school boards. Yes, sir.
To increase the national debt limit?
Well, one of the things that we have in our balanced budget amendment that I know Larry Craig is going to talk to you about is a 60% vote that is required to increase the debt ceiling. And I can assure you that if Bill Clinton starts vetoing our effort to bring government spending under control by reforming government, that I certainly would be willing to use the debt ceiling as a choke point to stop that process. Yes, sir.
Richard Army was here the other day touting the flat tax. What's your feeling on the flat tax, the value-added tax, the sales tax?
Well, first of all, the most important tax reform bill we can pass is spending control. There are some Republicans, and Dick Armey is not one of them, who still have this idea that the government can spend whatever it wants to spend, and all you got to do is have some gimmick in the tax code and everything will be great. We cannot let the government keep spending more and more and more money and expect to have any hope of keeping what we earn. So the first reform we need is to cut government spending, to make the government smaller so that opportunity can be bigger. I think Dick's idea of going to a flatter tax rate is a good idea. And I think we need to begin with putting binding constraints on spending. We need to double the dependent exemption for children. We need to cut and index the capital gains tax rate. We are certainly going to have another good election to institute some of these dramatic reforms. And it's important that we remember, as happy as we are about where we are, we didn't lose control